Is it Kosher? I'm pleased to see some of you who were here last time, and I hope you all enjoyed our first conversation. Tonight we have as our guest Rabbi David Cohen from the Chicago Medical Council, whose one of their myriad tasks is the certification of food to be kosher. He knows far more about it than I do, so it's with great pleasure that I welcome you to Temple Bethel.
Thank you.
And I'll invite Rabbi Cohen to share some information with us, and then if we can, toward the end, can we ask questions?
100%.
100%.
100%.
There's water for you.
I don't know if any of you ever speak. Is that too loud? Okay?
No. And if you, that's okay.
Do you want me to stand down there?
If you want to, we can just take off the wireless. You can use that.
I have to just tell you that it's no fun to just stand up here and talk and talk and talk. So everyone should feel free to have some questions and make it a little more exciting. Okay, I am, as was mentioned, I'm Rabbi David Cohen. I once took a course, and at this course they said they wanted each person to introduce themselves. And they said, when you introduce yourself, give us some way to help us remember who you are. Each person had that job. So when I got up there, this was some time ago, I said, my name is David Cohen. In that audience, I said, my name is David Cohen. I said, and if you want to help remember it, when you look at me, it makes you think of the pitcher for the Yankees, David Cohen. At that time, he was the pitcher for the Yankees. And they all looked at me and they said, he doesn't look a thing like the pitcher from the Yankees. I said, exactly, that's how you're going to remember my name, because the last thing you thought it was, that's what he looks like. So that's why. As Liz mentioned, I work for the CRC, Chicago Medical Council. We grant certification to local establishments like restaurants, caterers, pizza shops, and hundreds of industrial manufacturing facilities. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about kosher. I'm going to start by mentioning that I know that I'm the second, so I don't know what happened last week. So if I say something that you've heard already, you just tell me about that and I'll move on. When the Torah tells us that we need to do different mitzvot, it doesn't always tell us why we're supposed to do that. And in the midst of eating kosher, the Torah tells us something. It can't say that that's the reason for the mitzvah, but the Torah tells us something about why we eat kosher. And the Torah says that a person who eats kosher, it creates a kedusha, a holiness in the person. Okay? So before I say what I think that means, does anybody here have a thought? What does that mean that it makes you a holy person that you eat kosher food? Or what does it mean to be holy altogether? Forget about it for kosher food. Separate? Okay, that's a good start. Anybody else? Well, what comes to mind when you think of someone who's holy? Well, what does holiness mean to people? So, holy, if we had to use one word, we might use separate. We might use that word and say separate. But really what it means is that it's someone who's always thinking of what their purpose is. A person who's on their mind, they take life seriously. And they separate themselves from certain things that everybody else sort of falls into because they're putting a little more thought into their life. They want to have a more meaningful life. The Torah tells us that we eat so much, we spend so much of our time and so much of our energy in eating, we need to, of course, to function, that God wants us to always be, when we eat something, we say, wait a second, is this what I'm supposed to be doing, or what I'm not supposed to be doing? So the exact reasons for each kind of why food is or is not kosher is not, we're not going to talk about that. I don't know the reason why this food is kosher or is not. But God is telling us, when you're about to eat food, you're about to sit down and say, should I eat this or should I not eat this? The fact that you have to pause for a second and say, should I eat it, means a person who's thinking, a person who's wondering, is this what's good for me? Is this what's going to make me into a better person? And that in itself makes a person holy. A person spends his life thinking, before I do something, is it right or is it wrong? The way I work in business, the way I deal with the person next to me, the way I do anything that I do, it's a person who's thinking, has those things on their mind. And of course, we take those orders that come from God. And the way I think of it is anybody here a mechanic? Okay, no one's a mechanic. Good. Is there someone here a mechanic? Okay, well, when a mechanic, a mechanic. Okay, when you buy a car and you open up the instruction manual and they say, this car, you should use 5W30 oil. Okay, does anybody here have any idea what 5W30 means instead of 10W40? I haven't a clue what it means. But guess what? Well, the instruction says, for this car you use 5W30. It means this, if you were ever changing your oil, that's what you would use. You don't know what it means. You don't understand why. There's all different types of oil. And I don't know what all those numbers mean, but it means something. So that's how we take kosher law. Also, we were created with a soul. We were created with some sense of spirituality. And God says, that's what's good for your soul. So it's good for you to eat that food. Whether we do or don't understand it, that's what we do. So, what is it that makes food kosher? What is it? You've heard last week, I'm sure someone told you. What is it that makes food kosher or not kosher? Anybody? Me. Okay. That's true. I tell you that it's kosher. Okay. What am I supposed to do? So, the truth is that when you go to many companies, you tell them about food being kosher, they're convinced that means that the rabbi comes in and gives a blessing. And if the rabbi, offers a blessing on the food, it becomes kosher, which is not true. Actually, I just heard a story. A company that makes, I forgot what they make, but they said that 15 years ago, a rabbi came up and visited the factory, and in the back of the factory, we had trees growing, and there's a special blessing recited when trees start to blossom in the springtime. There's a blessing that's recited. The rabbi saw these fruit trees blossom, and he made the blessing. He said, well, I can make a blessing on your trees because they're starting to blossom. It's a special blessing once a year to make this blessing. And he says to me, it was 15 years ago. We had our best year that year. We never had as much fruit as the year that rabbi came in, and I think, he says it's the greatest thing. It was a CRC rabbi. And we love the CRC because of that. Anyway, but we don't bless food to make it kosher. So, I'm going to mention the three of the main things that would make food kosher, well, basically would make food not kosher. Basically, everything is kosher unless there's something wrong with it, unless it's not kosher. I'm going to mention three of the things, the three main things. There are other things as well, but the three main things that would make, the three main categories of foods that are not kosher. And they are, and we'll talk each one of them a little bit about them. And then we'll move on to what it means that I give certification, that I say the food is kosher. So, the three types of food that are mainly not kosher are meats, certain kinds of meats. We'll spend a few minutes looking at that. It's not kosher to mix milk and meat together. Those to be mixed together. That's another part of being not kosher. And the third is bugs. Okay, bugs are not kosher. So we're going to talk about each one of those just for a minute. And then we'll go on to, well, what does it have to do with me, the rabbi, coming in to see the food become kosher? So in meat, in short, there are 5 requirements to make meat kosher. Okay. Anybody want to guess what those are? Any of the 5? That in my mind, 5 requirements to make food kosher, meat kosher. Chew its gut. Okay. So the first thing is, actually, I would group that into one, which is, you have to know it's from a kosher species. It chews its cud and has split hooves. That makes it a kosher species. The most common not kosher meat that we see in the street is pork. Pork has split hooves but doesn't chew its cud. So pork is not kosher. Okay, and there are certain fish that are not kosher also, but when we talk about meat, it has to chew its cud, and it has to be an animal that is from a kosher species. That's number one. That's correct. That's the first requirement to make it kosher. But for that, I can just buy beef. Go buy beef. Well, beef comes from a cow. Cows are kosher. So there are 4 other requirements to make the meat kosher. Go ahead. You both say that together, the way it's slaughtered. That's correct. So when we do shechita, the way the animal is slaughtered, it's done with a super sharp and clean knife that has no marks in it. It's a very quick and painless process. And it kills the animal in a very specific way that has to be shechita. Good, that's the second step. Okay, but now there's another step that goes right before shechita that maybe people are not familiar with. And that is, only allowed to eat animals as kosher if those animals are healthy. Animals that are treifas, animals that have certain kinds of defects to them that mean they're not going to live long, we're not allowed to eat those kind of animals. So an animal is checked before and after the slaughter to make sure it's healthy. Beforehand, we check it to make sure it's healthy, that it walks. But an animal that can't walk a couple of steps, there's something wrong with it. So we check that it's healthy beforehand. We check that after it's slaughtered, we check inside on the lungs. There are parts that are checked, parts on the legs. There are places that are checked to make sure it was a healthy animal. Okay? 2 more steps. What do you mean by that?
is kosher, part is not kosher.
Okay, so what he means by that, that's very good. Most people are not familiar with that. And that is that within an animal, when an animal would be slaughtered in the temple, in the Beis Hamikdash, there were certain parts of the animal that were brought onto the altar, onto the Mizbeach, to be burnt. Certain fats that were cut off the animal and put onto the Mizbeach. Those fats we're not allowed to eat. Okay? Those are ones that are designated for God. Those are the ones that's part of thinking when you eat food is that, this food came from someplace. I got this food from God. Some of it goes to Him. So those fats we're not allowed to eat. Those fats tend to be in the back of the animal. The back of the animal, there really are kosher parts in the back also, but it's so difficult to do. Basically, they just cut the animal down in the middle, at the 12th rib. Everything from behind that is sold onto the non-kosher side, and from the front is what we eat from. Excuse me. A certain amount is cut out from the front also, but basically, all those fats that we're not allowed to eat belong in the back of the animal. So we do, it's called nikor, they traver, or in Yiddish word, they traver the animal to remove certain fats, and then we can eat it. Okay, and last? Very good, soaking and salting. One of the things that we're not allowed to eat is blood. Okay, the way the Torah says it is, the blood is the life force of the animal. We're entitled to have certain rights over animals. We're certain, in a certain sense, we're more important, if you want to say that, than animals are. So we're entitled to eat an animal, but the life force of the animal we're not allowed to eat. Okay, the blood we're not allowed to eat. We get the blood out by soaking and salting the animal to remove all the blood. Okay, so that's what it takes to make kosher meat. I was on my way here. I made a stop at the Jewel down the road, about 2 miles down a street called Calumet. Calumet. Stopped down there and was happy to see that sitting there, it's actually pretty common, even in a smaller Jewish community, that there's Empire Kosher chicken there. You can go buy kosher chicken right here in the local supermarket. And it's really, when I work in kosher certification, and I live in Chicago, there's quite a large Jewish community. And most of the people there have lots of opportunities to get kosher food. It's really pretty easy for us to get kosher food. There's a bigger community. We have more opportunities. But one of the reasons why we certify food as kosher, if I have to say this, is not for the people in Chicago. It's not so that if I'm sitting in Chicago, I can have kosher food, because if there's going to be kosher food any place, it's going to be in Chicago. It's really so that when you go out, I travel for kosher certification, and you travel to the most remote areas where there hasn't been a Jew in 20 years. You walk into the supermarket, there's loads of kosher food. Okay? That we appreciate certifying food for these large manufacturers because we know we can walk into supermarkets any place and you can find kosher food. Walk down all the aisles and you can find kosher food. So I was happy to see that here. Anyhow, okay, the next is milk and meat. Okay, next, another type of non-kosher is mixing milk and meat, and that's the part of kosher that people very much control in their homes. That's in your house. Of course, you can buy products that have those mixed together, but you very much are controlling that in your house. I'm making sure not to put milk and meat together. And I was told that it was mentioned even right last time, but I'll mention it myself, which is when a person is thinking of keeping kosher or increasing their sensitivity to keeping kosher, the way we do that, anytime we want to make ourselves better, we do that one step at a time. Okay? If I want to make sure that I'm more patient when I deal with my children, I don't say, I'm never going to raise my voice again to one of my children. If that's not what you say. That's obviously ineffective. I need to take steps, small steps towards getting that place. So, for example, there's someone I know who was beginning to keep a kosher home, and they said they were ready to keep kosher. I mean, they just went up to it at that point, keeping kosher. And they said what I'm going to do is, when I bread my chicken, so the batter that I breaded in, I used to put milk into that batter. I'm not going to put milk into that batter. That's my first step that I'm going to take. No milk in my batter. Or it's coming up now. It's almost November. When I make my turkey, I'm not going to put butter in when I glaze my turkey, I'm going to use something else and not use butter. So that's a way. We control it in our house, in our own homes. The milk and meat part of kosher is something we do by ourselves. That's more our control of what we do in our house. And we have more ability to say in that, when I eat a corned beef sandwich, I'm not going to drink milk at that meal. I'm not going to do that together. And then, last is, for most people, it's more surprising, of course, that bugs are not kosher. Now, most of us think, big deal, bugs are not kosher. Big deal. I mean, I never had this great desire to catch a cockroach and start, frying him, It never occurred to me to eat bugs, big deal. I mean, that doesn't, strike me as Hey, Rabbi, now I can do that one, Not eating bugs, that's for me. That's the one I can do. But actually, we'll talk about it as we go through. There are two areas where bugs come up most in our kitchens. And one of them is, again, something we control, and that is in fresh fruits and vegetables. We buy different fruits and vegetables, some of them have more or less bugs in them, and we need to do things to clean them to make sure that there's nothing in them, that they're clean. Excuse me. Now, there aren't going to be, none of us are expecting to see a snail inside of our lettuce. I mean, we wouldn't buy that. We would never go back into that store again. But there are smaller bugs out there to see. And I'll mention, someone here mentioned that they have the CRC's app. The CRC, you mentioned it? The CRC has apps for all the major smartphones. We have also quite a presence on our website. And our apps are called CRC Kosher. And those apps list many things. We'll mention some other things as we go on, but among them is, if you go to a vegetable, it'll tell you this is what you need to do to clean the vegetable to make sure it doesn't have bugs in it. This is what you should do to it. You go through a long list of vegetables and pick the one you want to see what you have to do. So one part is in vegetables that you have in your home. But there's one bug that seems to find its way into many foods. The bug is called carmine or cochineal. Have any of you ever heard of that? Okay, well, it's a bug you crush it up, and you crush thousands and thousands of them to make this color. It's a really great coloring for foods. Tends to be in reds, but little oranges and purples also. And it makes a great color. If you have, have you ever seen Listerine comes in all different colors? Okay, well, the orange Listerine has carmine in it. Okay, that's what it's called. The orange color comes from. It's on the package. You can read in the ingredients. It's in there. Some of you may have heard, I don't know, maybe a year ago, Starbucks proudly announced that they were going to be reformulating their strawberry frappuccino. I believe that's the one that was. That it would now have a natural coloring to it. They were going to take out the artificial colors and put it in a natural color. They were very proud of it, that we will now have a natural color to it. Until people found out that the natural color that was going to be in there was going to be these bugs. And people were like, guys, that's not what we wanted. Give us the chemicals. We don't want bugs in our frappuccino. And they switched to another natural color. They found another natural color instead. They didn't last very long. But there are other people, Tropicana makes a red grapefruit drink that has the same coloring to it. Again, so this color finds its way into different places. That's a kind of thing that's in a packaged food. Sometimes it's listed on the ingredient panel, but not necessarily. Just, color. Color sounds innocent enough, and in fact it usually is. Okay, so, before I move on, I was about to ask a question. Before I move on, yes. Excuse me? It's spelled cochineal, Cochineal, maybe? When I grew up, I had to know how to spell. But now that I use a computer, I don't have to spell anymore. So, I'm not so great at that anymore, So, my kids are like, why they teach us spelling? My computer knows how to spell. Like, what do you want from my life, So, anyhow, but I think that's how the Cochineal. I think that's okay. Any other questions before I move to the next section? Okay. So, talk a little bit about what makes food, so to speak, not kosher. Okay, so a little bit you could guess then what I do. So in making meat kosher and fish kosher, you could guess what I'm doing is that there's a lot of oversight to make sure all these things happen, to make sure they're kosher, Okay, now that I told you that there are bugs in vegetables, so then in the vegetable company, you can buy salads that have a certification on them. They're making sure that they're clean and they don't have bugs in them. But what else goes on? What else do we do when I tell you that a can of baked beans is kosher? Well, what could be wrong with the baked beans or whatever, some other food? What goes on? So I want to talk to you a little bit about what we do so you can understand it. And while I'm talking, there's two parts. One is to explain to you what it takes to make that food kosher. And the other is to help you understand there are many different kosher certifications out there. Okay? Hundreds and hundreds of them. Okay? The truth is, anybody who wants to could start a kosher certification. We don't have a Jewish pope who says this is what you have to do. No, anybody who wants to, you want to open up Munster Kosher and call it, put NK with a little squiggly line on top of it and say this is Munster Kosher, go for it. Anybody can do that. You don't even have to be Jewish. Anybody can do that. It's a free country. We're all do whatever we want to. So anybody can start up their own kosher program. So a little bit what we're going to be talking about is what differentiates between a kosher certification that's reliable and one that's not. It sort of goes hand in hand with, well, what does it take to make the food kosher? Will help us understand what does that mean that someone's not doing such a great job? To help you with that, for those of you who have our app has on it many, many symbols of kosher that are acceptable, that we consider to be reputable, loads of them. Because other people who are sincere and do a good job, you can see those. For those of you who are not like that, I brought cards that we give out to people. These are cards people stick in their wallet. It's for when you stand in the supermarket. These are symbols that we consider to be reputable and acceptable on products that they certify. And the truth is, sometimes when companies say to us, what is it? How complicated is it for us to become kosher? So sometimes we give people an exercise. We say to them, Howie, you don't keep kosher, and you've never met anybody who keeps kosher. But we say, take a card like this and go into your house. And the truth is, just look at this top line. These are the really biggest certifications. You see us, of course. We're proud of ourselves. OU and Circle K and Cup K. These are the big ones that you see on a lot of products. And we say to them, go home and open up your pantry. Open up your pantry and look around and see how many foods in your pantry are kosher. And you're going to find out that in the United States, kosher food is really, really easily available. If you walk in, I did not look into the snack aisle, but if you walk into Jewel and you walk down the aisle of chips or whatever other snack appeals to you, you're going to find there's going to be 10 different brands, of which, 3 of them are going to be kosher. So we ask people to do this when they go home, when they're thinking about making their companies kosher. Just they should realize how easy it is to get kosher ingredients that they're going to need. But for people who keep kosher, it's the same thing. If you walk into the supermarket and there's crackers and crackers, well, one brand has a nicer label and one brand costs a few cents less. But between them, you're going to find one that's kosher. So it's something to think about. In America, from that side on packaged goods, it's really, in a sense, we have it very easy if we want to keep kosher. We walk out there and we look in the supermarket, and with a little practice, you'll find out where they keep their symbols. And with a little card that tells you, well, which of those symbols mean anything, which one of those do we consider reputable, you'll be able to find lots of food that's kosher. Yes?
Rebecca, what, you may say this later, and please defer to later views. So what determines what of these is considered reliable in terms of your own standard and standards of others, that one could say this is reputable and that product is indeed kosher? Because sometimes what's not on here is just a package of C and K.
Right.
So what differentiates that from C or C?
Okay, good. It's a good question. I'm going to talk about the main part of your question. That's what I'm going to be talking about. Okay. But I'm going to mention just the one thing you said, which is about a package that has a K on it. Just has a K on it. What K means is the person who manufactures that food wants you to believe the food is kosher. Okay. It does not necessarily mean that there's even anybody who stands behind it. The letter K can't be copyrighted, and anybody can put a K onto their package. You can't put the MK with the squiggle on top on your package. Once you people here copyright that symbol, nobody else could use that. But if I want to just put a K on it, that anybody can do. So the symbol K on it, sometimes it means something, like on Kellogg's cereals. You may have seen on Kellogg's, breakfast cereals, have all of them, 90% of them, next to the big styled K on the front, there's a little K or KD. Okay, and that stands for either kosher or kosher dairy. And in fact, there is a reputable certification that stands behind that. The company chooses to just put a K or KD to indicate it's kosher or kosher dairy. But other companies put a K and it doesn't mean anything. Other people come, that means we want you to believe that it's kosher. That's what it means. But, it may not mean anybody stands behind it. That's a little bit of a different question than what happens if there's a not reputable certification. How will I judge whether that symbol that I see means something or doesn't mean something? Okay, the K may mean really nothing. That's the truth. You got to guess, but yes, go ahead.
I guess what you would recommend in the case, say, Kellogg, you say it has a reliable body behind it that proves the Kashrus, that you would check with someone, say, like CRC, and say, this product, I'm keeping
100%. Right. So we recommend people, obviously we like ourselves, so you can tell you to call us, or look from our app. You can send questions from our app, or email us, info@seriousweb.org. You can contact us and we'll answer that question. Actually, the cereals are on the app. It says if they're kosher or not. The kosher cereals are listed on our app. But if you have to see something else, you pick up a bottle of, a can of potatoes, a jar, a can of potatoes, and there's a can next to it. Well, does that mean anything? And if you call us, assuming we know the answer, we'll try to help you. We try to be helpful. I have to tell you that the CRC is not just a kosher certifying agency. The CRC really is a rabbinic group. It's the rabbis of Chicago said they wanted a body that would do things, rabbinic kind of things. So one of the main things that people know us for is our kosher certification, but really that's not where we come from. Really, our history is an organization that's there for the rabbis to help the community. And from that side comes the fact that consumers who call, we feel that's our job, is to answer consumer questions. It's very much our job as opposed to we just certify companies. Very much our job to help consumers. Okay. So, when you want to certify food, I wish I had a package of food here. You pick up a package of food, you look on the ingredient panel, and you read over the ingredients, and the first assumption is, and actually that's what it used to be when I was younger, maybe some of you as well, people who wanted to keep kosher read the ingredients, and they looked at the ingredients, and this was the rule. This is the rule that used to be. Okay? If it doesn't say lard, you're okay. Then you're safe. And the second rule was, if you were a little bit more strict, the rule was, if you can't pronounce it, then it's for sure kosher. Okay? Anything with a really long, 4 syllables, it's kosher. Okay? What do you think? They don't make pigs out of those long letters like that. That's not what it is. No, it can't be. It's kosher. Okay. So you had to look for, if you were, everybody was lard and it had really big letters, then for sure you were safe. But, so let's talk a little bit about that. And that is, there are items that go into food that are not listed on the ingredient panel. Okay? A great example of that is, when you make maple syrup. Okay? Maple syrup is like the most natural of things. They tap a tree, and out comes this syrup, comes out of the side of a tree. Okay? It's sort of like as right from the ground as it can be. Well, when they cook up the maple syrup, you need to cook it up. What happens is, it foams up. As you cook it, a lot of foam builds up in the pot. Well, they're using a big pot, but there's a lot of foam building up. So, it's just not workable in the factory to have all this foam, or in the farm, to have all this foam building up. What do they do to keep the foam from building up? Okay. The classic way to do it is, they took a piece of animal fat, okay, and they hung it above the pot. But what would happen is, as the pot heated up, it would melt some of the animal fat. As it got hotter, it would melt a piece of fat would drop in. Fat is a great anti-foam. It disperses foam. It would drop and disperse the foam. As you kept on cooking, the more you cooked, the more anti-foam you got. As soon as you stopped cooking, it solidified back again. It was ready, waiting for the next pot to come there. Now, they don't list that. That doesn't have to be listed on the ingredient panel if you have anti-foam in there. Anti-foam is it's called a processing aid. It's just part of making the food. It's not an ingredient in the food. You don't have to list that there. Okay? So, if we keep kosher, we all don't want, there's lots of other people besides keeping kosher who don't want animal fat in their maple syrup. But that's an example of that. As the chaplain mentioned, I forgot your name. I'm terrible with names. Aaron? Terry. He mentioned that there are lots of people who keep kosher. There are lots of people who buy food with a kosher symbol, even though they're not Jewish and they don't keep kosher. And that is to say, he mentioned that in the prison, in his prison that he takes care of, one of the people who eats kosher is a Muslim. And he does it because he believes that kosher certification covers what his requirements are also. He has his own religious reasons why he wants to eat certain kind of food, and he believes kosher covers that. And there's lots of other people. So when I mentioned that there are people who don't want animal products, and they'll buy kosher powdered products because they know that the kosher maple syrup doesn't have any animal fat in it. Okay? So they buy it for other reasons. So the truth is, I know this may sound a little strange, but most of the people who buy food with the kosher symbol are not buying it because they're Jewish. Not buying it because they want to keep kosher. They're buying it for some other reason, like they're Muslim, or they don't want dairy, or they don't want meat, or some other reason why they're picking that food, but not specifically because they're Jewish and want to keep kosher. Okay. The government has a interesting way of classifying butter. is graded as double A is the best butter, and grade A is the next best. It's pretty good. And then grade B, which is not so great. And then I guess there may be even grades that are lower than that. But interestingly, surprisingly, the grading system is counterintuitive. The grading system is not how we would guess you would grade the butter. We would all think, that the best butter is double A, and the worst butter is grade B. Well, it's not exactly like that. What it is the butter that has the most bland taste to it is double A. And the butter that has the most buttery taste to it, that's the lowest grade. Okay, and now, the people who make this up didn't lose their minds. The reason why they make that is because the best tasting, the blandest butter comes from the purest butter fat. And the stuff that tastes most buttery comes from the lowest quality butter fat. Does that make sense? Well, it's really strange. I mean, so the best tasting stuff is the lowest grade, and the worst tasting stuff is the highest grade. It's a little strange. But it is what it is. Well, what do you do when you want your butter that's grade double A? Now you want to make it taste a little bit better. So they pre-digest the butter. Okay, they start to break down the fat that's in the butter. And the way they do that is, there's something called lipase. Anyone heard that term before? Lipase? Lipase is an enzyme that's extracted from the throats of animals. And that enzyme, you can imagine, that an enzyme that's in the throat of an animal helps in digestion. Well, they take that enzyme out, put it into the butter, and it helps digest the butter a little also to make it taste more buttery. Okay, well, they don't do that in kosher butter. Okay, that's very not kosher. The animal's throat is not kosher, and milk and meat is not kosher, so that's very not kosher. But as I was mentioning, that's not something you're going to see when you read an ingredient panel. Lastly, if I go to the store and I buy vegetable oil, then it says it's 100% pure vegetable oil, then I have all the right to believe that that's what it is. I'm buying the vegetable oil that it says what I'm buying. In fact, companies are allowed to put in a little bit of what they call rework. Rework means if something doesn't go right in the manufacturing, let's say the labels go on upside down onto the bottles. Or let's say the temperature wasn't exactly right. Or something doesn't go right. So they take the stuff and they reprocess it. They do it again. So you're allowed to put a little bit of, a certain amount of rework back into your food. That means, is to say, is if this factory is making kosher oil, corn oil, and animal fat in the same factory, which happens, then rework from that side of the factory to end up in this side of the factory, and that's legal. Up to a certain amount, that's legal to do. So now, I told you a couple of things that you wouldn't see them on an ingredient panel. But also, before I came here, I visited a flavor company. Anybody have an idea what goes on in flavor companies? What do you think they do in flavor companies? If somebody wants to make, let's say, strawberry flavor. So what do you think they do in a flavor company? Right, well, they do use most people, I'll show you, this is an intelligent person here. Most people think that, of course, they use some kind of chemicals, but they start with strawberries, or they work something with strawberries. And the answer is, as we would say in Hebrew, lo haya v'lo nivra. It never happened. It has nothing to do with a strawberry. It never, ever, ever saw a strawberry. It has nothing to do with anything. If you walk, I was in the factory, they have hundreds of chemicals, okay? Stuff that, if we saw it, we would think it would be used for cleaning floors. Okay, that's what it would look like to us, that's what, we see all these long names, all those stuff I told you can't pronounce, that's what's there. And they got a bunch of guys mixing a little of this and a little of that, and ta-ta comes out tasting like strawberries. So that can contain, what says on the package, flavor, even natural flavors, can contain anything. That's what it is. Literally, it can contain anything because anything they don't tell you what's in the flavor. That's proprietary, what's in the flavor. So they can put anything they want to into that. Some of the worst offenders in the flavor companies are these two flavors. Okay, I won't. I hope everybody eats it. I won't really ruin it for you. And two animal products, one called civet and castoreum. They come from animals. You really don't want to know which part of the animals they come from. And they're very not kosher. It's from a beaver and a cat. Okay, they're not kosher. Okay, by no means is that kosher. And they're very natural. They're natural. Beavers are natural. That's considered natural. That's good. You can eat that. I mean, you can't eat it kosher, but I mean, that's considered natural and wonderful. Okay, so from this perspective, I'll mention that what I've said to you so far is that in granting certification doesn't just mean a rabbi stands there to make sure they're not mixing any milk and meat together. That's not my job, really. Really, giving kosher certification means really understanding what's going on in a company. I need to understand the processes. I need to understand the ingredients. I need to understand the science behind what's going on in this factory. Because only when I understand that can I then say is, I know what's going into this product, I know how it's made, I know the equipment it's made on, I know what the processes are, and now I can help understand whether it is or is not kosher. Okay? When you have a long name that goes this long of a name of a food, well, is it kosher or is it not kosher? How does anybody know? So that's what we do. If you look on our app, when you look there on the app, you'll see consumer-type foods. Foods that you would walk into a store and you'll say, do raisins need kosher certification? So you'll type in raisins and you'll see what comes up, whether raisins do or don't need certification. Well, how did we come up with that? How do we know whether raisins do or don't need certification? Well, raisins are also, again, pretty simple. You know what raisins are. They take, if you have been to California, they take the grapes off the vine, lay them down on the floor, come back a couple days later, and they're raisins. It seems straightforward enough, and it's really pretty. And they have a matter. I'm sorry, I don't want to. They lay it down for it, and they come back a couple days later, and they have raisins. Okay, well that's wonderful, but only someone who understands the process will know that when you put thousands of raisins into big containers, they put an oil onto it to keep the raisins from sticking to each other. Okay, well, if you knew that much, you might also know that there's really one big manufacturer of that oil. There's a specific oil that just everybody uses in the United States. There's one main manufacturer who does it, who happens to be kosher. So if you look on our app, I haven't checked, I hope it says what I'm about to tell you, that raisins that you buy in the United States don't need certification. But what went into that answer was, well, what does it take to make raisins? Well, there was a couple of years ago, there was a whole to-do. There's a fly that lays eggs on those grapes as they're laying on the floor, a Drosophila. It lays eggs in the raisins, and people were finding bugs in their raisins. Well, is that an issue or is that not an issue? Well, so our answer of raisins don't need certification includes understanding of that issue also. How common or how likely is it that you're actually going to find insects inside of your raisin? I told you, insects are not kosher. And neither is the oil that would be sprayed on top of it if that wasn't kosher. So we give answers to consumers on those levels, but there's a lot that goes into being able to know whether the food is kosher. We just had, is today Wednesday? Today's Wednesday. Yes, Monday, a company, some of our rabbis went to visit a company that produces some alcoholic beverages to see whether they could supply a different CRC company. This company doesn't itself want to be kosher, but they want to supply to somebody else. And the rabbi who we sent there to do it is a rabbi who's very familiar with that industry, with the alcoholic beverages industry, who's very familiar, and you can't pull anything over on him. When he walks in there, he knows what's going on. And he knows where to look things and what questions to ask and how to decide whether the food is or is not kosher. Okay? There's quite a number of questions to it. Together with him, one of our other rabbis went along for training. One of our other rabbis went along who's not so familiar with that to say, I want to learn more about this so that I can do a job better. And maybe next time I'll be the one who's appropriate to send for that. So all that kind of work goes into running a reputable kosher organization. Of course, there are standards. There are standards to what makes food kosher or not kosher. But the truth is, more than the standard of do we agree on what makes something kosher is the expertise and the experience to be able to do that. I'm going to give you an example. A company applied for kosher certification, and what they made was fried eggs. Okay, they took eggs, they cooked them, and they sold them frozen. And when they applied for kosher certification, they said, "Oh, we're already kosher, and we want to use a new certification, so we want to apply to use." Okay, so they're already kosher. They told us the name of the person who certifies them, and we were very disappointed because from experience we knew that this person is really not on top of what he does. But we didn't know it as bad until somebody walked in. It wasn't me. So somebody walked into the factory. This company makes, as I mentioned to you, they make fried eggs. They also make ham and eggs. They make two different products. Well, forget about it. There wasn't anybody who had any idea whether they were cleaning up the equipment between them. If I want kosher eggs, an egg is an egg. But I don't want ham in my eggs. But whether there was cleaning, no one had any idea. But what was the strangest was that as the boxes, the eggs were put into the boxes and came off, all the boxes had a kosher symbol on them. And it was up to the person at the end of the line if he quick enough got his marker to scrape off the symbol. That was the system. If he comes by, if he's ham and eggs today, scrape it off. Regular eggs, let it go by. So it was like, this is not a way to run an operation. I mean, come on. I mean, who are you kidding over here? I mean, everybody knows that ham is not kosher. But this is not like a joke. Everybody knows that that's not kosher. No question of standards. Everybody knows that. But the rabbi has no control. I walked into a factory once. It was under someone else's certification. And the question was, should we accept that person's certification? It was a little questionable. We came to see it. And as we walk in, we're walking through, and there were dozens of tanks. And it's me, and the other rabbi, and someone from the plant. And we come to a tank, and the plant person says to me, so, Rabbi Cohn, this is where we keep the kosher whatever that we make. And the rabbi who certifies it says, no, it's not there. We keep the kosher over here. He goes, no. That's not kosher. This is where we keep the kosher. And I'm like, yeah. Seems like the guy real on top of the work over here. They really got their act together over here. Like, as you can imagine, we weren't too thrilled. We went to a different company where this company processed oils and fats. Coconut oil and animal fat. Coconut oil and animal fat have very similar properties. Okay? They get processed in a very similar manner. And this company was basically not kosher. They wanted to switch over and have one part of the plant should be kosher. Okay? There was one problem in this company. That is, it was a very large plant. And in this company, they had maybe, I'll say, 30 tanks. And this company's style, that was the problem. The style in this company was, anytime somebody thought, maybe one day we'll have to bring product from tank 14 to tank 27. So they would run on from 14 to 27. The next day, you know what? I think once we're going to need to go from 27 to 26. We might have to another line this way. So there were pipes go every direction. Every tank was connected to the next one. So we said, if you want to have a kosher product, we have to see that tank is not connected to anything. We don't want anything mixed into that. It has to be all kosher. The company spent probably a month plotting it out and making sure that this tank had nothing there. They had no connections, only straight from the kosher to the kosher. There were no breaks in between. We came afterwards. They were all prepared. They knew we were coming. We spent a day and a half following the pipes in this company. That's how complicated it was. And they still missed things. Okay? Well, we, in our day and a half, still caught things that they had missed. So it takes a lot of work, a lot of expertise. There's really a lot goes into making sure that the food is kosher. The people who are buying kosher food, if I go into the store and I saw Empire Kosher chickens over here, well, I'm paying extra and I'm limiting my choices because I want to eat kosher. Okay, so if I'm doing that, well, then I want to get something that's really kosher. I'm making my effort to do that. I'm willing to pay it a little bit more. I'm willing to say, hey, I'm only going to get this and not that because I want to eat the kosher food. Well, then I want you to be giving me what I want. I paid for that. I'm asking for kosher food. I deserve to get what I want. And a person who's not careful or doesn't know enough or is completely just out to lunch, he's cheating me. That person is telling people that the food is kosher. The company is saying, oh, Rabbi, if you tell us it's kosher, what do they know? If the Rabbi says it's kosher. And me as the consumer, I'm being misled. So we try to do a good job. We think that we do a good job. We work with the other major agencies in the United States, and everybody keeps each other on their toes. We learn from each other, and we share with each other. We're going to be going to a conference in about 2 weeks of all the major, about 70, 80 major kosher agencies in the United States to share information with each other. And we believe we do a good job. We try to share that information. I mentioned our apps and et cetera, our cards here like that. And we hope we do. But of course, I encourage you to keep kosher. But more than that is, when you look to keep kosher, you need to be educated. You need to understand and say, being kosher takes some effort to make sure the food is really kosher, and that you do it right. Okay, anybody have any questions? Yes?
Kosher style.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so kosher style, in many states, including Illinois, in many states it's illegal to call food kosher if it's not really kosher. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to be, kosher that Rabbi Cohen thinks is kosher. It has to be some standard of kosher. If a person calls something kosher style, then that doesn't mean anything. Kosher style means I feel Jewish when I eat this food. It doesn't mean anything. Jewish food. I know someone who's involved with different kind of Jewish organizations, and they say, well, when we have get together, we always serve bagel and cream cheese because that's Jewish food. So, okay, that's true. Lots of people think of bagels and lox and cream cheese as kosher food, but that doesn't mean it's kosher. Just because they call it, because it's kosher style, means that it makes you feel like it's kosher food, but it doesn't mean very much to it. It's unfortunate. Again, if you just want a food that seems kosher, then that's okay. If I really want kosher, then I came here for a reason. I came because I wanted kosher food. I didn't get what I wanted. Imagine if I wanted to be vegetarian. Imagine if I wanted food that had no animal products in it. So that was important to me that I have vegetarian. And in your restaurant, you served me French fries with animal fat. I said, hey, I came here for vegetarian. You said, well, no, the potatoes are vegetarian. I said, yeah, the potatoes are vegetarian. But you cooked them in animal fat. So you didn't give me what I wanted either. I came here with a certain, I think that something's important to me, and that's what you should be giving to me. So. Yes?
What's the view on hormones, antibiotics, and genetically modified food?
Okay, that's a very good question. We get that question very often. It's a very common question. And that is, what do the rabbis say about, does food become kosher if we take tomatoes and we put into them a gene from, a shark, and we put genes into them to make the tomato tougher, okay, or to do something, we genetically modify corn so that it can't be attacked by who knows what. Does that make the food not kosher? So there are two parts to that answer. There are two parts to the answer. One is, as far food which is not healthy or not safe is inherently not kosher. We're not allowed to eat foods, not just if the animal wasn't slaughtered, etc. A food that's not healthy or safe, we're not allowed to eat either. But from that perspective, so there are people who claim that lots of these modified foods are not healthy. Okay, who believe that those foods are not healthy. In that respect, we don't consider ourselves to be the experts on that. We leave that to the people who claim to be the experts. The government regulators. And if they consider the food to be healthy, if they consider it to have been safe, then whether that's the truth or not the truth, I don't know. But we leave that up to their judgment. So I say that in this case, I'm saying it because we're not making a decision. But sometimes the other way also. If you said to me, I'm going to make challah every Friday, and every Thursday I'm going to bake challahs in my house, and I'm going to sell them to the community as kosher. I want to sell, people want challah for Shabbos, I'm going to bake challahs in my house, and I want to sell them as kosher. Would you certify those challahs as kosher? We get this question pretty often. Would you certify them as kosher? And the answer to that question is no, we wouldn't. Even if you keep kosher, and even if you're a reputable person, we wouldn't do it. And the reason is because until the local board of health verifies that your house is suitable to serve food to the neighborhood, then we're not ready to step in there and say the food is kosher. They have to take responsibility. If they're willing to say that your house is good for the public, that's fine, but they're not going to. There's all kinds of codes and rules. Okay, so one half of the question is the genetically modified food, is the enzyme, all these kind of unusual things happen, is it safe and healthy? We consider ourselves not experts on that, and we leave that to the government to decide. But then there's a different question, which is, okay, it's healthy and safe, but it's got shark in there. Right? They pull that some chromosome from who knows where, from some animal, and they bred it into it. So for that, we say we don't consider that to be an issue for the following reason. The way we view it is as follows. Torah was given to individuals, to humans, to deal with it on the human level that we see. So the same way, when I mentioned that there are bugs in vegetables. Well, there are microbes every place, right? There are microbes all over the place. If I open this water bottle, I'm going to be drinking microbes. There's all kinds of things here. But those bugs are not forbidden because no one can see them. Now, scientists can see them. We put it into a lab, we can find them in there. But on a human level, we don't see any bugs in there. Therefore, we don't concern ourselves. And the same thing is with the genetically modified foods. What's going on is on very, microscopic levels, beyond what a typical person sees, and we don't consider that to have an effect on the food. Did I answer your question?
Yes. One question I just will, can you talk a little about hormones or, in animals?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so hormones. Okay, so I guess two parts to that. What you feed to an animal doesn't affect its kosher status inherently. I mean, if the animal would sit and eat non-kosher, it wouldn't make a difference. As far as the health of it, I'll go back to the first thing I said. On the health of it, if the government thinks that that's safe, they think it's safe. And really what happens is, with a lot of these things, it is very much consumer driven. What I mean by that is that the government says, let's say it's safe to give hormones to the cows. Let's say that. And you think, my gosh, I don't want to eat that stuff. I don't want to eat that. Then you're going to pick a brand that doesn't do that. You're going to pick a brand, and the consumers will drive the market. Say, everyone's going to pick this brand of chicken instead of that brand of chicken because they don't feed they don't give them hormones to it. So that's how we see it. Yes.
When the CRC goes to a manufacturer and certifies a product, I mean, is there a recurrence rechecking, or is it once every 6 months or a year? How do you know something doesn't happen in between that changes and makes it unconventional?
Okay, that's a good question. Question was, I'll repeat it for people, how do we know that they follow the rules? I mentioned to you, we walked into a whiskey company and we saw that things were okay today. Well, how do we know what's going to be tomorrow? And the answer is that when we certify a small establishment, small I mean like a local bakery, a pizza shop, a restaurant, those businesses change all the time. And we won't certify it unless there's someone in the store at all times who's responsible for kosher. That's to say, someone who we consider reputable, who's in charge of, he has to be there all the time. If the owner is not that kind of a person, let's say the owner doesn't keep kosher, therefore he's not responsible, the owner will have keys to his own store. Only the person who's responsible, who's in charge of kosher, will have keys to that store. But that's when we talk about on a retail level, where there are customers sitting outside ordering wings, okay? And if you don't have any wings in the freezer, you're stuck. There's a customer who wants wings right now. So when you're stuck, you give the guy $20 and say, go next door, buy me wings. I don't care if they're kosher, because I have a customer who's sitting here right now who wants to eat wings. I don't care if they're kosher or not, I have to serve my customer. In larger manufacturing, it doesn't work like that. Okay? Large manufacturers don't run outside and buy an extra bottle of oil. So when we come to a company, part of our assessment is, how often should we come here? We never just come once and don't show up again. Some companies, we have to come to once a year. My absolute favorite company. The CRC certifies a company that blasts rocks out of the ground, grinds the rocks up, and so that's some kind of a mineral. I don't know what the mineral is, and they want that mineral to be certified as kosher. So the rabbi comes there once a year because there ain't nothing doing this place. I mean, his main thing that he does is he hopes he comes on the day that it's actually blasted, because that's the most fun. No one wants to watch him grind up the rocks. He wants to watch him actually blast it out of the ground. But we have other companies that we have. I'm not talking restaurants, I'm talking about manufacturing companies that someone goes to 3 times a week because there's so much going on. Most of them are in between, a couple of times a year. But the evaluation, we look at them and say, how likely are they to change what they're doing? What kind of a business do they run? How much contact do we have to have? Sometimes we come there all the time, sometimes we come there almost never. And sometimes it depends. It says, you can do everything you want to. When you want to make that product, you better call the rabbi before you do it. So that part of our evaluation is how often should we visit. And you should know, it was mentioned before in what goes on about kosher certification in China. It had been mentioned before. And one of the difficulties about certifying products in China is it's very difficult to visit plants in China. It's not like here. Here I get onto the interstate. I go to a plant I need to go to, and I'm back home. If I need to visit a plant in Miami, I don't visit it. I send one of the rabbis who lives in Miami to visit it. I don't go from Chicago to visit it. I have one of our representatives over there. Okay, well, guess what? There are about as many Jews in this room as there are in China. Okay? There are rabbis all over the place to go visit plants. And the plants are not so easy to get to. And So it's very difficult to make those visits, and a lot of people who, in fact, do certify slack it off. They won't do as many visits. It's so difficult to do those visits. It's so much more complicated than what's here around the corner. Here, I can visit those people who went to visit the liquor company that I mentioned that went on Monday. On the way back, past another CRC certified company, and they stopped in there to see what was doing. They just dropped in because they were passing by. They wanted to check up that things are the way they're supposed to be. And that's a difficulty. In fact, the CRC basically doesn't certify products in China at all. We don't feel that we can do an effective job there. So our board, even though many people in the office wanted to do it, but our board said, we're not interested. The board said, it's a board of rabbis. They said, just forget it. We don't need to do it. Let somebody else do it. We don't want to have that responsibility. We don't think we're going to do a good job. But back to your original question, here in places where we can visit, part of our assessment is how often should we visit? Should we come here every day or every other day or once a month or once every 3 months? Yes?
What about the triangle K picture?
Okay, so I should have said this when I started. Aside from mentioning that the letter K is, could belong to anybody, and that the CRC is a great hashkafa, I think of course we're great, and giving you my card, I'd rather not comment on specific Kasher. Just that's something. To answer your specific, I'll answer the question just because someone asked it. I'll ask you not to ask more like that, if I could say. If you call, no, really, because it's silly. Because if you call my office, they'll answer your question. If you call the CRC, someone back in. You hope the phone number's on here. Yeah, the phone number's on here. Or you email them. They'll answer your question about any hashkafa. They really will. And we don't find them to be up to our standards. In our interaction, we haven't found them to be up to the standards that we keep. And therefore, we only take them on specific products. So if you call up the office and say, you know what, I want to use Sun-made raisins. That's something that sticks in my mind. I want to use Sun-made raisins to have a triangle cake. Is that okay? Sun-made prunes. I told you raisins don't need syrup. I want to use Sun-made prunes. The call up the office and say, yes, you can use those. So it depends on the product. What we know more about it, we can recommend or cannot recommend depending on what it is. But there are many who have shared like that who we don't feel are doing up to the same standards that we are. So we don't feel comfortable recommending it.
How is it possible in some plants for some products to be kosher and others not? Thinking like Kraft Foods, which is gigantic. Some of their products are, I believe, kosher.
Mm-hmm.
Macaroni and cheese is not.
Mm-hmm.
So what is involved in that process? Obviously, it has something to do, I would imagine, with ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
But how is that determined where there are multiple lines operating in a...
Okay, so the answer for that is the simplest companies are ones that are all kosher. Right? That's the simple setup. It's all kosher. Nothing comes in that's not kosher, and it's simple. In larger companies, first of all, the truth is that sometimes it may say Kraft on 10 packages, but they're not made in the same place. So you may see Kraft macaroni and cheese and Kraft cheese single. Those are not necessarily made in the same place. But also, when actually one plate needs to make kosher and non-kosher, then there needs to be extra controls on that. There needs serious work on it. When he asks how often would we visit that place, you can imagine we're going to visit that plate much more often. I was just on the phone while coming here with a rabbi for a plant that the CRC is going to be coming involved with. And they say, in that plant, everything is not kosher except when the rabbi comes. That plant is not allowed to make kosher except when the rabbi is there to actually oversee it. It's that complicated. But there's too much mixing of kosher and non-kosher. That plant is not allowed to make kosher unless there's a rabbi actually standing there while they make it. That's pretty strict. That's pretty serious. That's saying, hey, there's so much not kosher floating around here. But other companies, they do it all the time. What would that depend on? What could it depend on? Well, what does the company do to switch between one product and another? What does the company make? A company that makes, most companies have their own quality control to make sure there isn't a blending between one product and the other. And when we look at their protocols and say, that's good enough. You have a good protocol and you follow it. We actually see that you do it, you take it seriously. Then we say, okay, you could do both because we know you won't mix in this and that. But other people are either sloppier or we don't think they're going to follow the protocol, then we'll have to find some other control to make it work.
You stated at the beginning that kosher really implies an element of holiness. And it's my understanding that also implied is the matter of relationship. That I understand that when I go to that product and I see the label, I can assume that what I'm getting is the real deal.
Yes.
Describe those cases where there's a breakdown with that and that doesn't happen. I understand, and I may be wrong in this, but I understand that there's a division in the state of New York, for example, in the Attorney General's office that deals with when the breakdowns come in fraud cases that have occurred where people are told that something is, and then you find out it's not. And then the problem becomes for me as the consumer. I bought that product with the understanding of I assume what it is, it is. The same way as someone who goes to a health food store and buys something that says it's 100% vegan, and it's not. So what certitude can you have, or how do you as CRC work to make sure that that's the case, and then what happens when it's not?
Okay, so what happens is that kosher certification has become pretty sophisticated as the years have moved on. And companies that agree to become certified, they choose to become certified, contractually obligate themselves to follow the protocols that we set for them. When they don't follow those protocols, then basically, after the rabbis have a look at it and see, so to speak, how badly they messed up, it moves to lawyers. Okay? A lawyer will come in and say to them, you labeled something as kosher when it really wasn't. Or, let's say you have no relationship with us. You just start labeling it as kosher. Again, we take legal action to protect the integrity of us saying that food is kosher. That comes on all different levels. But we believe we do a good enough job that when you see the kosher symbol, you could be confident that it's really kosher. Mistakes do happen. They happen to the CRC. They happen to everybody else also. We try to respond. Well, it really depends on how not kosher it is. If the person labeled it as CRC, but it was really kosher anyhow, that's what it turned out was kosher anyhow, we're not going to respond the same way as if he labeled it CRC and it really wasn't. It was really not kosher. But we try to take a strong stand in those cases in order so that people take us seriously.
One element of the conversation last week that our guests spoke about, and we had a conservative rabbi, representative from Chabad, and a reform rabbi. They all spoke about, for them personally, the matter of ethics.
Okay.
And it being ethical, and this whole notion of ethical kashrut. Could you speak about that for a minute, if you would?
Sure. Being ethical is obviously a part of Judaism. Everybody knows that. Lots and lots of parts of the Torah are full of ethical directions. Being honest and being forthright and hundreds of different directions of how being ethical is part of being kosher. Part of being Jewish. Part of what the Torah requires of us. We don't consider that to be part of our kosher certification. Kosher certification covers whether the food is kosher and things that are related to the food being kosher. If we were to know that somebody was not ethical, it's actually in our contract that we can drop certification for a person if we find that the person is doing something crooked, underhanded, even if it doesn't affect the food's actual kosher, so to speak, kosher status. But by and large, we're not looking over the shoulder to say, are you treating your employees nicely? That's not. We don't consider that to be part of our kosher certification. Again, if we knew that they weren't, one of the people who we certified was caught stealing electricity from his neighbors. He had run a wire from their building to his building. So he was saving loads of money because they were paying for his electricity. So we don't want to do business with that kind of person. So we say, did that make the food not kosher? Well, it did make the food not kosher. But this is not someone who we can work with and do kosher, and we wouldn't certify them. But we don't make that a condition of our certification. We're not saying let's check how much, do you really give everybody a lunch hour before we certify you? It's sort of out of our realm. It's appropriate, it's correct. If I ran a factory, I would want it to be run ethically, but we don't consider that part of the kosher part.
I have to say, one of the things that I get, I guess I must have signed up for it somewhere else, where email alerts, when something was mismarked or found not to have been kosher that was certified as being kosher, whether it was CRC or OU or any of the other ones. So that's another way to keep more current.
Right, that's true. So part of being a reputable certification, or reputable anything for that matter, is to be able to admit when you did something wrong. And when we find out that somebody's labeling product with CRC and it's not kosher, then it's easier to not tell anybody about that and quietly get rid of it. People who are more upstanding and who are trying to be honest will tell it to people. So that's the kind of alerts you see come out and say to them, something went wrong. There was a mistake over here. So I don't know if you get it from the CRC. The CRC does send out those kind of alerts collected from other agencies. But each of the people who are more reputable, when they made a mistake, they made a mistake. If something went wrong, that's... Yes?
I'm sure there's different costs based on how many times you have to go to the client every week and the level of complexity to determine the Kashrus. But can you give us some kind of sense as to what it costs these manufacturers to become CRC certified?
Sure. The general range for plants that we certify is in the range of between $2,000 and $5,000 a year. That's a general range of where it is. There are ones that are less. There are ones that are more, depending on where they're located, how often someone visits, how much office work we put into it, etc. But it runs in that kind of a range. And it's worth mentioning it only because it's mentioning. Sorry, to answer your question, is that when you think of it, for a larger corporation, that's not a significant amount of money. The way I explain to companies, if I get asked this question every day, how much is it going to cost to become kosher? When Ice Mountain wants to sell you product, they put ads in paper, and they design really beautiful labels, and they do all kinds of things to convince you that this is the best water, and you should buy their product. So I say, there's a little OU on this package, and when I see that, that's how I know that I should buy the product. So the color label attracts some people to buy the product, and the symbol over here attracts double tones to buy the product. So $5,000 or $2,000 to attract a certain audience. It's a business decision. Do you think that it's worth it? Will that attract enough people to buy your product to make it worthwhile? And in most cases, yes. In most cases, in an overall budget for a company, the amount of money that it costs to make this product, you can imagine it's probably not very complicated for the OU to certify this as kosher. Right? It's just water. Come on, how hard could it be? So how much do you think they have to pay them for that? And there are lots of people who only buy because they see a kosher symbol on it. Actually, if you look on our app, we'll tell you that it doesn't need certification. But there are lots of people who say, don't be so smart, Rabbi. When I see the symbol, that's when I want to buy it. I want to see the symbol. That makes me know that it's kosher. So, that's how we look at it. Overall, we don't find that companies really consider that to be a big expense. For little mom-and-pop operations, yes. But for anybody of any meaningful size, that's not an unreasonable expense for that. And as you said, it depends exactly on what you said. How close they are, how often we're going to visit, how much work goes into it. You had mentioned before, and how do we know when we have mixed plants? Do you know that for every product that we certify, we have a formula for that product? We don't have a formula telling us how much percent. We don't know how much of this and how much of that, but every ingredient that's in there, they have to give to us, sits on our computer databases, telling us what goes into that product. So we have all this work that goes into tracking all those products. If you have one product, if you have 500 products, we do different amounts of work for that. So that has to do a little to what you said, is how do we know which is the kosher and which is the not? Well, we have the formula. And we make sure that formula is accurate to the,
You mentioned stopping at the jewel when you came over. So that's the other side. We spent a lot of time talking about what goes on in the plants. What happens in terms of getting product to stores? And you said earlier that the whole process of certifying is more so for people who live in outlying communities than people in the north side of Chicago, Rogers Park, and Skokie,
right.
Those areas. What indeed goes into a store's determination to stock the product that they stock and how that can be influenced if we wanted to ask them to have more product available?
Okay. And the answer is, it completely depends on the community. It depends on what people ask for. There's a reason why there are pumpkins in the store now, and there aren't pumpkins at other times of the year, because people want pumpkins now. Right? It's the end of October. They want pumpkins. They put pumpkins into the store. So if everyone just sits back and says, I wish that Jewel would carry more kosher products, then they're not going to carry more kosher products. If someone knocks on the door and says, hi, we represent the community. I'm here from the temple. I'm here from the federation. We're here to meet you. We want to talk to you. And we want to talk to you about carrying more kosher products. they're out to serve people. I'll tell you something. This is not really kosher related, but it ended up falling in our lap. We just passed the holiday of Sukkot. And on Sukkot, we built a sukkah. And the rabbis in the community were trying to help people build their sukkahs. And what happened is we went into Home Depot to talk to them about providing materials that would be good for people to build their sukkahs. And it was really close, and they did a little bit to help out. But we said to them, next year we're going to come back a month before Sukkot, that you can help the community. And they said, 100%. They said, we'll build a model sukkah in front of our store. And we'll teach people how to do it. And we'll have our guys building panels, and we'll do all these things because, well, guess what? They want to sell lumber. Right? So they want to sell it. So if we can help them sell to our community, they're thrilled to do it. So if somebody walks in and says, listen, this is what people would want to make the food kosher. The people in our community are having interest, and this is what would appeal to them. I don't know what it is. You have to say, what is it that people would want over here? Then you say, guys, you only carry 2 varieties of chicken. You're getting Empire anyhow. Maybe we could work on getting 6 varieties. Maybe you can get us coca. Maybe you can get us salami. Whatever your thing is, you say, in our community, this is what people would buy. They want to sell products. So it really is a matter of the community asking for it. You judging what they want and then ask them to bring it. But, I was in New Jersey a couple of months ago. New Jersey has quite a large Jewish community. And while walking through a supermarket that had a kosher section to it, it wasn't a kosher supermarket, but they had a kosher section. We met there the buyer. He says, I'm in charge of buying kosher products for, if I remember, it was 31 stores in this chain. In other words, I make sure that they all have the right products in them. I'm the person who's supposed to know what's good for people who want kosher. So those stores are sensitive. They have someone in charge just to sell kosher food. Now I don't know if that's going to be in Munster, Indiana, but to the extent that you want for it. Jewel is. I'll say one more thing. There's a Jewel in Evanston, right near where I live. It's just past out of the border of Chicago. Has a huge kosher section. I mean, really. It's a whole supermarket just for kosher. There's a whole other supermarket besides that, but it's a nice. They have somebody who works for them. His name is Yaakov Yarmo. He works for Jewel, not for the local Jewel. He works for the parent company, whatever the name of the parent company is, to help put kosher food in all their plants, in all their stores, the stores that need it. So maybe you want to, instead of, in addition to the store, call up Yaakov Yarmo and say, hey, we have a community here. All we're getting is Kedem grape juice, matzah, and Empire chickens. We want a better selection. And he's the one who does it for my Jewel. Maybe you do it for yours also. Okay? Any more questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Rabbi Thomas, thank you so very much. Thank you for attending. And